All right, here we are for heading two for chapter 14, the expansive realm of Islam. The second subheading is the expansion of Islam. On your screen, you'll see the two things that College Board really wants you to focus on in this heading. Muslim rule is going to expand to many parts of Afro-Eurasia due to military expansion and subsequently through merchants, missionaries, and Sufis. Also, they want you to pay particular attention to the Abbasid Caliphate, which is going to be fragmented and eventually dominated by Turkic people. When it comes to the start of the heading, we start with the death of Muhammad. Now, Muhammad wasn't assassinated, he just died and died a bit unexpectedly. The issue was Muhammad was the seal of the prophets. He was definitively the religious and political leader. And so when he died, the question became, well, who picks up? Because no successor had been chosen before his death. They decide on Abu Bakr to lead as the caliph. Again, he can't be the prophet because that's Muhammad, but he is the leader. One of the first things he does is lead war against the villagers who start to abandon Islam after the death of Muhammad. That's one thing that often happens when a great charismatic leader dies is leader's not there. So their organization can lose power or popularity. As we can see, what's going to happen is that after Abu Bakr helps to really consolidate this darkish purple, he is going to help lead some attacks on the Byzantine to the west and Sassanid to the east. Okay, so as you'll notice, the 632 is again the death of Muhammad. The slightly lighter purple will be what the first four caliphs are going to be able to take on. So you can see how they take on some of the Sassanids and some of the Byzantine. And then the 733 is going to be how far the Umayyad Dynasty gets, and we'll talk about them in just a second. Okay. Then the heavy bluish purple line here, that's the abbasid. So as you can see, we kind of grow, and then we kind of go back a little bit in some areas. As you'll notice, that's a very large territory, especially to try to rule in the 600s or 700s. And so that's going to be one of the issues, is how do we keep control of this after we win the initial battles. The other thing that's happening is there is disagreements over who gets to be the caliph. So Ali was actually related to Muhammad, but was passed over by Abu Bakr. He does eventually become, I believe, the fourth caliph. And unfortunately, he gets assassinated along with a lot of his closest followers. The remnant of those who really believed in Ali are going to create their own separate party called the Shia. So Shia Islam, or we call those people who practice that the Shiites. So the much larger group of Muslims is called the Sunni. Okay, one of the ways that I use to remember that is that Sunni, like the sun. Okay, so that's a much bigger thing than anything else in our solar system. From what I understand, Shiites also believe that caliphs should have some sort of connection to Muhammad, but they are the minority versus the Sunni majority. The Shiites do have their own religious sites as well. So, for instance, Karbala is a place that Shiites will go on pilgrimages. It's seen as at the same level as Medina and Mecca and Jerusalem, or at least similar. So after that, after the death of Ali, we start to have the Umayyad Dynasty takes over. And that's originally the people from the Meccan merchant class. Again, Muhammad was a merchant. They make the capital farther north to make it easier to be in the middle of the action in Damascus, Syria. And the other group that really heavily partnered with is this rich Meccan merchant class with the Arab military aristocracy. So this is going to lead there to be very limited social mobility for non-Arab Muslims, which is going to start to breed some discontent because, again, the Arab militarized people will be favored and put in leadership roles. Not only the Muslims, if you were not Muslim, if you refused to convert, you could be charged a jizya or a head tax. So they won't kill you, they won't necessarily force you to convert, but you will be taxed if you're in their territory. To add to this discontent, the Umayyad leaders are eventually going to be living in huge amounts of luxury, which is going to make them very hypocritical to the people that they're ruling. Again, if you'll remember one of the reasons why Muhammad had to leave Mecca was how outspoken he was against greed. Again, was a merchant, so it wasn't against profit, but excessive profit or the pursuit of greed to the point of sin was what he would rail against. And so these Umayyad leaders living in such luxury are going to rightfully look hypocritical. The resistance eventually comes up from the Abbasid dynasty, and it's going to be centered around a guy named Abu al-Abbas, who's a Sunni Arab, but he's going to be allied with the Shia and with the non-Arab Muslims. This goes on for a few years. Especially, they are able to take control in the eastern part of the empire, in like Persia and Mesopotamia. So Persia is now Iran, and Mesopotamia is essentially Iraq. It does go on for a few years, but the final blow is hit in 750 when the Abbasids are going to invite the most prominent Umayyads to a banquet and then kill them all. So that is going to greatly establish them, at least at first. In general, the Abbasid dynasty is going to be much more diverse in their administration. So it's not just going to be run by Arabs. They are going to be military competent, but they're not going to be bent on imperial expansion. If you remember from the map, the Umayyads are as large as it gets, and then the Abbasid shrinks it down just a little bit. This is when we talk about Dar al-Islam, or the world of Islam, or the House of Islam. That's going to be considered the Abbasids. And they're going to have some military activity. You could see there on the previous map I showed you, but it's not going to be the focus of what they're trying to do, and that's just on the outskirts. Their administration that the Abbasids put into place had a very heavy Persian influence. We didn't study it unless you took Ancient World last year, but the original blueprint for how a classical government controls a large area was the Achaemenid administration, and so that's going to heavily influence how the Abbasid administration is run. They have the main court in Baghdad, which again is in modern-day Iraq. And another very important group throughout the empire is going to be the Islamic scholars, the ulama or the qadi. Now, again, when you think scholars today, you think of like someone who's a university professor. If you'll remember, previously, we talked about how we're going to see a lot of different Sharia laws. We're going to take the teachings of Islam and try to codify them into law. So these ulamas and qadi are really going to be more like judges in a sense. They're going to be incredibly intelligent, incredibly well-spoken. They're going to know everything they can and be very persuasive when arguing with the Quran and with the Hadith and what all these other documents point to how people should treat each other and to resolve disputes and to create laws and so on and so forth. The high point of the Abbasid dynasty is going to be Caliph Harun al-Rashid from 786 to 809. Again, Baghdad is not only going to be a political center, but a center of commerce as well, so an economic center. It also, as tends to happen where there's a lot of money, we are able to afford to pay for much more art and much more, and so it's going to be a cultural hub. So it's going to be the political, economic, cultural hub. Eventually what will happen is with the Abbasid decline is going to happen with the death of Harun al-Rashid. And again, without a clear succession in place that the people agree with, there's going to be a civil war amongst their sons. While that's happening, a lot of the other provincial governors are going to start to assert their regional independence as the Abbasids' leadership are in turmoil. We're also going to see the emerging of some dissenting sects or heretical movements, so small religious groups and groups against the orthodox teachings. The Abbasid caliphs eventually are going to become puppets of the Persian nobility, the rich, the people of rich descent who were living in Persia, who will be taking over. Later on, the Seljuk Turks are going to really influence what's happening with the Abbasids, and the Sultan will be the real power behind the throne. So there will be a caliph, but they're not really in charge. The sultans, the rich, will be truly in charge. And with that, that is section 2.